There are things about all of our lives, and some of them are reflected in our culture, but things that delight us, that disgust other people. Probably the areas that's most noticeable about is concerning our appetite or what we, and our taste palate and our taste buds, and things within our own culture. Sometimes the smell and our taste are so closely akin and connected that sometimes what we know doesn't smell good, that it doesn't taste good either. But there are exceptions. I will eat. I don't like the smell of boiled eggs, but I will eat boiled eggs. I don't like the smell of cabbage cooking, but I'll eat cabbage. That is a delight for some of us. That is that which disgusts others. You get outside of our culture, and you will find that to be true. What totally disgusts us seems to be a delicacy or a delight for other cultures. When I went to the Philippines, they have what's called in the northern part, I think it's pronounced a balut. Down in the southern islands, pronounced a balut. If you don't know what that is, it is a fertilized duck egg that is almost ready to hatch, and then they boil it and they eat it. And oh, it is just disgusting. The guy in Bacolod Island that I saw eat it, he ate it shell and all. It was disgusting. But to him, it was wonderful. When I pastored at Gulfport, walked into the back of Reeman's funeral home through the back door, and one of their workers was warming up Vietnamese kimchi, which is fermented cabbage and radishes, and it's got to be something else in there because it just smells horrible. But to him, he was warming that up for his lunch. Probably the worst odor is in all through the Pacific Rim area, a fruit called what is it called? Durian. The durian is banned in Bangkok in a lot of the restaurants, but it is a fruit, and those who like it just say, oh, it's wonderful, but it has the worst smell that I've ever. And there's a show on one of the networks called Bizarre Food. This Zimmerman, I forget his first name, but he compared it to a completely rotten, mushy onion is what it smells like. And I'm not going to get anywhere close to eating it. But those things that seem to be so disgusting to us, and even in this room, there are those who probably would like oysters and some who don't, who like boiled okra, and I like them fried oysters, fried okra, but I'm like Jerry Clyre. I don't want to eat anything I can't stop on the way down. So things that seem to be delightful to some that are disgusting to others. That's kind of the passage that we come to in Mark chapter 12. We're going to see the things about this situation that seem to disgust Jesus, and then we're going to see a situation that delights Jesus. And they seem unconnected, but they're not. They're not just random events that Mark's recording, and so we're going to look there. There are some people who live their lives in a way to see what they can get out of God, and that disgusts God. And there are those that have experienced grace that live their lives to see what they can give and submit and surrender to God, and that delights Him. Now, let me say right up front, whenever you're thinking about what I live to be able to serve God, that in no way says that we believe you can earn your salvation or that we can pay back our salvation. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that is not of yourself. It is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one can boast." We don't repay God. We don't live in a way that we think we can earn our salvation. It is by the grace of God. But once you have experienced that grace, you live with an attitude to want to please God and surrender to Him. And we're going to see prime examples, or at least contrasting purposes through these two stories this morning. Mark chapter 12, and beginning in verse 38, in His teachings, He was saying, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and like respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and chief seats in the synagogue and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses, and for appearance's sake offer long prayers. These will receive a greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury and began observing how the people were putting money into the treasury. And many rich people were putting in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amount to about a cent. Calling his disciples to him, he said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors to the treasury, for they all put in out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned, all she had to live on. The religious leaders received a condemnation from Jesus. This poor widow received a commendation from Jesus. And we're seeing here what disgusts Jesus and what delights Jesus. So let's look at, first of all, what disgusts Jesus. And from this story, you understand, I'm going to call it just show-off religion. That disgusts Jesus. These folks who, as he says, to beware of them, they walk around in long robes. They like respectful greetings in the marketplaces, chief seats in the places of honors at the banquet. He says these are the folks who are just showing off their religion. The definition for show off is to make a deliberate or pretentious display of one's abilities or accomplishments or goods or property. These were folks, and you can just picture them as they're walking through the town, that as they come in, they are practicing their religion. And religion sometimes does things just so it will be seen. That's what religion sometimes does. The word that we use for religion, is from a Latin word that means to do it consistently, to do it over and over. If you do something religiously, you do that over and over. And then the other word is where we get our word ligament from, and it means a ligament ties a bone to a muscle. It's that which ties or that which binds. And that's what religion often does, is that it is something that is done as a show-off on the outside, and that it binds us to something. Now listen, there's nothing wrong with doing things religiously. There's nothing wrong. We are tied to doing things consistently and over, because that is part of what we're tied to in life. We live according to seasons in life. We live minutes and hours and weeks and months and years, and there's nothing wrong with that. We want to do things regularly. We want to have a daily Bible reading. We want to have a daily quiet time. We want to have a daily prayer time. We want to come together weekly for a corporate worship time. We want to experience those things on a regular basis because that's how we function. And there's nothing wrong with that. We want to give regularly. There's nothing wrong with what is being done. It's the attitude of doing it. And whenever we just simply come to those times, that it is so that we do it in a way that others will see that we are consistent, that we are there, that we are doing it, and that others will take notice, then you crossed over that line from that which delights Jesus to that which disgusts him. Show-off religion is that which is done for outward appearance. It is, he speaks about them putting on their robes, and as they walk through the streets for everybody to know who they are. As they walk through the streets and to see them, you can almost see them strutting down the street. I can remember my grandpa many times. He'd see somebody strutting down the street, and his comment would always be, I wish I could buy them for what they're worth and sell them for what they think they're worth. That's what these guys, they were walking through the streets for everybody to know who they were, for everybody to take notice. And they would put on these religious robes so everybody would identify, oh, that's a scribe, that's a Pharisee, that's a Sadducee. They'd know who they were by their clothes. Now, sometimes, even to this day, we get caught up in that sense that we dress up on Sundays. When I was growing up, it was even more so. We had our Sunday clothes and we had our everyday clothes. We would put on our Sunday clothes, we would put on our going to church clothes, because we wanted to wear the very best that we have to present our best to the Lord. And that's fine. But it does not mean that that makes anything difference on the inside. And for a lot of people, my daddy, the only time I saw him in a tie and a suit would be at a wedding, a funeral, or Sundays at church. When I was a little kid, all the little kids put on a white shirt and put on that little clip-on tie. Go to church, because we were presenting our best to the Lord. That's what we were told. But hardly was a Sunday that went by before we would pull away from our church, and my dad would have his tie off. I'd take that little clip off and hand it to my mama to put in her purse, not to be seen until the next Sunday. And there's nothing wrong with dressing up. These guys were doing it because they wanted to be noticed by others. There's nothing wrong with putting on your very best and coming to church and wanting to present your best to the Lord. But I'm here to tell you, we don't have a dress code. That's not what is important. It is not important that which we have on the outside. And there are a lot of people, why in the world would we want to get all dressed up to present our best to God and then get to church and the only thing that comes out are words of evil report or gossip or struggles or dissension or hatefulness. There's some people that get all dressed up on the outside, but nothing has happened on the inside of them. Inward purity has nothing to do with outward appearance. And James says in chapter 3, verse 6, he says, the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among the members of that defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life. It is set on fire by hell. Down in verse 9, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth, both blessing and cursing, my brethren, these things ought not to be this way. And that's what these guys, they dressed up so that everybody would see them, and they came through, they wanted the respect of everybody, but their hearts were wicked. Jesus had been debating with them for years now, and as he debated with this religious mafia, they wanted everybody to know, and that's what their religion was, that which was on the outside. Religion that is concerned just what others see you do is not really true discipleship. It's not truly following Jesus. This kind of religion is a show-off. This kind of religion wants public recognition. Look again in verse 38. He says, beware of them who walk around in long robes, like respectful greetings in the marketplace, chief seats in the synagogues, places of honor at banquets. This Jewish religious community had a pecking order. If you don't know what a pecking order, you've never been around a hen house or a chicken coop. The dominant hen gets to eat first. There is a hierarchical system of dominance. And that's what they're displaying here, is that they wanted public recognition. And they were doing what they were doing so that others would see them and others would honor them. That's why they were doing what they were doing. I learned that lesson the hard way. That still takes place. Early in the ministry, we had Vacation Bible School, and so whenever I printed the bulletin that week, and I printed the bulletin, for those of you who remember the old mimeograph machines, and I'd have to go take a bath after I printed the bulletin, and then everybody would get the bulletin, open it, smell it. If you never experienced that, and you won't know what I'm talking about. But I had thought we had Vacation Bible School, so I printed all the names of the people who worked in Vacation Bible School. Go ahead and say it. Ooh. There was a lady in our church and her sister-in-law, which had the same name, and their names were real close. And I inadvertently put the sister-in-law's name twice. And got to church that morning, and she picked up the bulletin, and all of a sudden, I saw her picking up and gathering her stuff. She gathered it, and she stormed out. I thought she was sick. And I started to mention, let's pray for her because I think she's sick. Well, I think she was sick. She's sick of me because she left and she was mad. And then they told me, well, and I saw what I did. And I went to her and I apologized. I said, I didn't do this on purpose. I am so sorry. And she said, I'll never set foot back in that church. And as far as I know to this day, she never has. That breaks my heart. But that is exactly what he's talking about here. You can learn that lesson the hard way. It's not what we do for other people to see. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 2, he says, so when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that you may be honored of men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. These are the things that disgust Jesus. And notice that it's not the gross moral sins that we would describe as something that is so wrong. It's the sin, you can almost call them religious sins. It's those things that are robbing God of the glory, even in the good things that we might do, robbing God of that kind of glory. It disgusts Jesus. Let me ask you this morning, whenever Jesus looks into your heart, do you bring delight or do you bring disgust to him? It's kind of harsh, but that's what he's saying. The second thing is, now let's move to the other situations told about, and what brings delight to Jesus. Let's read there again, verses 41 and following. This next scene blesses Jesus, and it is a sad scene in a way, or we would interpret it, but it brings glory to God. In verse 41, he sat down opposite the treasury, and he began observing how the people were putting money into the treasury. Let me describe. This was in the Jewish temple, and so there in that temple at that day, there were different courts and courtyards and different levels, as a matter of fact. You could go into, Gentiles could only go so far. God-fearers could only go so far into that court, only get so close. And then the next courtyard, the next level, then there was a courtyard for Hebrew women, and then there was a courtyard for Hebrew men, and then there was a place for the priests to minister, and then there was the place for the high priest and the Holy of Holies to go once a year. This is in the courtyard of the women. And as you would come in, there were, I think, 13 places, collection sites, shofars, places where you could come and give an offering. That's where the offering was brought. And in that, they didn't write a check, and they didn't write a credit. They didn't write something out. Their money was in physical money. And so you would find here, this is called, and maybe if you've been in church a long time, or you maybe has listed to the widow's mites. And as John writes this, and he says that she came and the value was about a cent. That was his Roman readers trying to help them understand. This was the smallest denomination of coins. This would be about 1/64 of a denarii. This would not be enough to even provide a meal. But this is all that the woman had. She had 2 widow's mites, and she came. And notice that what it says, that Jesus he positioned himself, and he sat there, and he watched not what the people were given. That's not his purpose, but he was watching, what does it say? How they were given. And whenever he watched this, he saw this widow come with her 2 mites, that's hardly anything, and he comes to watch her, and he calls attention. He honors her, and he calls his disciples and said, this woman is given more than all the rest have come. And some were coming, and whenever they came to be able to give a large offering, then they had to bring large items. They had to bring, if you drop a brick of gold in, it's going to make some noise, and everybody would know it, and so people would give notice. But these little 2 widows' mite, they didn't make any noise. There wasn't any fanfare, as Jesus takes note of that. And so it's important, it's not important just the amount that she gave. It's important that she gave it all. No one here can fully understand what this woman did. We live in a land of plenty. Our poorest people in our country, in our culture, have more by accident than this woman had. We don't know how old she was, but we know that she was a widow. We know that in that culture, in that day and time, the least possible impact that could take place through what she gave, it would amount to nothing. And yet, as she came, it says that she gave it all. Now, we sing, all to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. Do we really mean that? She gave everything. And I want you to see whenever she did that Jesus sees it's not that important amount that she gave, but it is important that Jesus saw her heart, that she gave everything that she had. This meant that she would not be able, she couldn't buy a meal with 2 widow's mites anyway, but she could not provide for herself because she gave everything. Everything. You know what that means? Everything. She gave it all. And whenever Jesus sees that, he is noticing that she has, what this speaks about her is that she has a spirit of dependency upon God. I'm not telling you that you need to give everything that you own. I am saying that what we all need to learn from this is that everything is already owned by God. He allows us to be blessed with it. We get back a portion. And I've heard people try to take this and use this about how we ought to give to the church and the amounts that we ought to give. Every place in the Bible, and I believe the Bible does teach us that we need to give regularly and that we need to give proportionately to what God has blessed us. That's what he requires of us. That's not what he's teaching here. I've had others to teach that this shows a good work ethic, that she gave this to the Lord expecting to earn more. That's not what he's teaching here. He's not teaching about work ethic. He is teaching that we come totally dependent upon God. Are you totally dependent upon God? And I learned that lesson that sometimes you don't know how to be totally dependent upon God until you are in need. If you are young and healthy and you are in the midst of the prime of life in your health, then sometimes you don't learn to depend upon God until you have physical problems and you're laying flat on your back. Sometimes you won't look up until you are flat on your back. And then you learn to depend upon God in other ways that you never would have learned whenever you were young and healthy. And so God takes different circumstances in our life. And listen, there's nothing wrong with the men who came and gave large gifts. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not what Jesus is condemning. As a matter of fact, as you look at life itself, you get over in the New Testament, you look in our day and time, if God has blessed you with wealth, then it ought to be an opportunity and a privilege for you to be able to give from your wealth. And what would this church be without those who have given large gifts of the wealthy? We wouldn't be sitting in this building. We wouldn't have the tools that we use if it weren't for God using the wealth that he has placed in our lives and the faithfulness of people to give back a portion of what God has given to us. But what he's teaching us is the Lord is looking at her heart. And if your heart's right, then everything else is going to be right. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, "For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his." 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 7, Brother Mike referred to it in his prayer this morning. "Each one must do just as he has proposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." That word cheerful is the word that we get hilarious from. We ought to laugh all the way to the offering plate that we are blessed to be able to give. But what he wants us to know about her is not just that she gave, not just that she gave regularly, but that she was totally dependent upon God. She trusted God to provide for her needs. And God knows our difficult situations. I can't help, it's just a human element within me. Whenever I look and I read this and I see what took place with her, and I think, why didn't Jesus do something for her? He knew that she was given out of her poverty. He knew that she was giving all that she had to live on. Why didn't Jesus do something for her? And yeah, Jesus could have, I don't think he had a checkbook, but Jesus could have let her go and look in a fish's mouth and get a coin out. He could have provided for her, and I don't know that he didn't do that, but he didn't record that. And I think in my heart sometimes, why didn't Jesus do something? And here's the answer. He did. He honored her. If Jesus would have given her $1 million, and he may have, we wouldn't be talking about that. But we're talking about her today, 2,000 years later. And I want to remind you when this happened. 72 hours, or approximately, before Jesus hung on the cross. And this is what he takes note of. This is what he pauses. If you only had 72 hours to live, what would you be doing? Jesus sat down And watch this lady. Psalm 34 and verses 8 and 9, it says, "Oh, taste and see, the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want." Why didn't Jesus do something he did? He honored her. Now, Jesus could have ministered to her in some other way. Jesus could have taken the thorn out of Paul's flesh. But what Jesus said is, "My grace is sufficient for you." And today the lesson for us is to learn to be completely dependent upon God, and that as we do, to know that we give with our heart, that we give him all. And then the second thing is that Jesus appreciates the value of your sacrifice. I had a friend, he said when he was little, he had a favorite uncle that he'd see once a week. And his uncle would always come in and say, "David, come on in here." And he would have in his hand a nickel and a dime. And he would say, "Okay, you can have one or the other. You can have the nickel, it's bigger, but the dime's worth more. Which one will you take?" And David would reach up and take the nickel. And his uncle would laugh, "Ha ha," put the dime back in his pocket. That happened several times, and David's sister said, "Why do you keep taking that nickel? You know the dime is worth more." And David said, "Yeah, but 100 nickels is worth more than one dime. First time I take the game's over." God has a different way of putting value to what we do and how we serve him. And for this lady, you can't say that she gave much compared to anybody else, but you can say that she gave much compared to her ability. And God has a way to value whenever we give him all of us, all of our heart, all of our time, all of our money, all of our resources, all of our lives. And you can't just give him all of your sin and all of your mistakes. You have to give him all. In 1707, Sir Isaac Watts wrote a song, "When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride." I like the last verse. "Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all." In 72 hours, Jesus was hanging on the cross. Do you think Peter or John or Thomas or any of the other disciples thought about this woman who put 2 mites in the treasury? Do you think they thought of her while Jesus was hanging on the cross? But do you think Jesus did? When Jesus was pouring out his all, do you think she encouraged him? Do you think when Jesus offered his all, do you think her actions blessed him? Listen, if we had all of creation to give him, that wouldn't be enough. But this woman gave him all. How about me? How about you? Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this wonderful